We all know the Ark of the Covenant as a solid gold chest with two angels on top. But did you know this simple wooden box was so powerful it killed people just for looking at it, or caused gold statues to repeatedly collapse? Tonight, we explore the weird history of the Ark of the Covenant and more. In today's video, we'll talk about the impossible, sacred blueprint that dictated its creation. So let's not waste any time, and let's begin. The first command concerned the primary material, acacia wood. This was a crucial and deliberate choice. The Hebrew name for this wood is shittim, and it came from the thorny, resilient trees common in the Sinai Peninsula. This choice speaks volumes about the pragmatic yet profound nature of the divine plan. Acacia is known for being extremely hard, durable, and resistant to decay, even in harsh desert climates. It was not the most beautiful timber, but it was the most enduring, a physical symbol of the lasting covenant it was built to house. They were building something to last, not merely a temporary resting place. It was a sturdy, earthy core, destined for immortality. The instructions then moved to the ark's precise dimensions, which lended a sense of perfect geometric harmony. The ark was to be 2.5 cubits long, a cubit and a half wide, and a cubit and a half high. For those of us using modern measures, that translates to approximately 45 inches long, 27 inches wide, and 27 inches tall. Picture a chest, roughly the size of a very large, old-world pirate's chest, but built with far greater purpose. These specific, rigid numbers ensured that the completed object held a specific weight and presence, making it large enough to be substantial, yet small enough to be portable. Once the frame was meticulously assembled from the acacia planks, a feat of carpentry in itself, performed by the craftsman Bezalel, it was time for the transformation. The ark was to be overlaid entirely with pure gold, both inside and out. This process, known as plating or overlaying, involved hammering thin sheets of the precious metal onto every surface. This was not merely a decorative act, it was an act of complete consecration. The humble acacia wood, the wood of the desert, was entirely hidden, sheathed in the brightest, purest, most immutable metal known to man. The object of the covenant could not touch the profane air. Its holiness required a barrier of absolute purity. A beautiful golden crown, or molding, was also instructed to run around the top of the ark, lending it a majestic finish. This feature further emphasized its royal, divine status, marking it as distinct from any other vessel or container. The transition from the rugged, desert-sourced timber to the glittering, refined chest must have been astonishing to witness. It was the wilderness itself giving birth to sublime glory. But the most critical part of the design involved its transportation, a feature that anticipated the sacred danger inherent in the chest itself. 4 rings of gold were to be cast and attached to the 4 lower corners of the ark. And through these rings were to be slipped 2 carrying poles, also made of acacia wood and overlaid with gold. The instruction was unequivocal and absolute. The poles were never to be removed from the rings. They were to remain permanently attached, ensuring that the ark could never be put on the ground or, more importantly, never touched directly by human hands. This permanent attachment of the poles established a profound rule of engagement. It underscored that the ark was not to be treated as luggage or cargo, but as a living, dynamic presence that moved only by the dedicated effort of the Levites, who carried it on their shoulders. This intricate system of poles and rings was the physical manifestation of the boundary between the mortal and the divine, a protective measure that would later be lethally enforced. The final piece of the overall structure was the lid, known as the mercy seat or caperet. This was not a simple lid. It was an elaborate piece of religious art made of solid gold, not just plated. On either end of this solid gold slab were two cherubim, golden, winged figures hammered out of the same single piece of gold as the mercy seat. These beings faced inward toward the center, their wings spread out, forming a canopy over the empty space above the ark. This space, between the wings and above the pure gold, was the designated meeting place, the spot where the invisible presence of the divine would communicate with Moses. The entire structure, the enduring wood, the blinding gold, the permanent poles, and the silent, watchful cherubim was a meticulously engineered conduit. It was designed to house the sacred and to be unapproachable by the common world. Its very weight and shimmer in the dry desert sun must have inspired immediate awe and fear in the Israelites, a physical guarantee that the covenant was real and present. This magnificent yet terrifying blueprint established a holy foundation. It was the stage set for the introduction of the items that would make the ark not just a golden box, but a repository of historical miracles and divine law. It is to those sacred contents, the items that solidified the ark's power, that we turn our attention next. We leave the meticulous golden shell of the ark and turn our attention to the treasures it was designed to contain. If the exterior represented the perfect artistry required for the divine presence, the contents represented the history, the failure, and the miraculous sustenance of the wandering people. The ark was not merely a golden chest. It was a museum of the miraculous, a repository of the most potent symbols of God's covenant with Israel. Initially, 3 items were placed within the ark, each telling a profound and complex story about the nature of their journey and their faith. The first and most central of these items were the stone tablets of the law. These were the famous 10 Commandments, inscribed by the finger of God Himself on Mount Sinai. The first set of tablets, famously smashed by Moses in a moment of righteous fury when he saw the people worshiping the golden calf, represented human failure and the swift fracture of the covenant. The second set, which were ultimately placed inside the ark, represented forgiveness, renewal, and the enduring nature of the law. Imagine these 2 flat stones, perhaps rough-hewn and heavy, nestled inside the glowing gold of the ark. They were the very words of creation, the constitution of a nation, and the moral compass of the world, all contained within this small, portable box. The presence of the tablets transformed the ark into the Ark of the Testimony, meaning the chest that bore witness to the rules and expectations God had set for His people. They spoke of obedience, of loyalty, and of the profound consequence of following or forsaking the law. Their stillness within the chest stood in stark contrast to the dynamic miracles that had created them. The second item was the jar of manna. Manna was the miraculous bread that sustained the Israelites during their 40 years of wandering in the desert. It was a daily, humbling reminder of God's direct physical provision. They could not store it. They could only collect what they needed for the day, fostering a total reliance on divine grace. A small golden jar was placed inside the ark, containing a sample of this manna, perpetually preserved. The jar was a symbol of sustenance, of the impossible made ordinary, and of the fragility of life without divine intervention. Its purpose was to serve as a perpetual reminder for all future generations that their ancestors had been fed by the very heavens. It was a tangible memory of hunger and fulfillment, a lesson against greed and a lesson in trust. The manna, being food, represented the physical life of the people, while the tablets represented their spiritual life. Together, they covered the entire scope of human need and dependence. The third item was Aaron's staff that budded. This staff, made of simple wood, had been placed inside the tent during a period of rebellion against Moses and Aaron's leadership. When the other tribal staffs lay dormant, Aaron's staff miraculously sprouted leaves, blossomed, and produced ripe almonds overnight. This miracle was God's decisive and dramatic confirmation of Aaron's exclusive appointment to the priesthood. It was a symbol of divine authority, judgment, and the power to bring life from dead wood. This staff represented the established order, the hierarchy of the Levites, and the boundary of who was and was not permitted to mediate between the people and their God. It was a potent warning against challenging the established sacred structure. So, the ark initially held 3 stories: the law, the tablets, the provision, the manna, and the authority, Aaron's staff. It was a complete theological statement in a box, ready to be carried across time. However, as the history of the ark progressed and the people eventually settled in the Promised Land, the historical records begin to shift. By the time King Solomon built the first temple, a major change had occurred. The Bible clearly states that when the ark was finally placed in the Holy of Holies, there was nothing in the ark save the 2 tables of stone, which Moses put there at Horeb. The jar of manna and Aaron's staff were gone. The loss of these 2 items is not explicitly explained in the scriptures, but it offers a profound symbolic conclusion. The jar of manna, the symbol of temporary sustenance in the wilderness, was no longer needed once the people were eating the produce of the Promised Land. The constant reminder of their wandering was retired. The staff of authority, perhaps, was also deemed less necessary once the priesthood was firmly established in the glorious, permanent structure of the temple. Only the tablets remained, the eternal, unchanging, non-negotiable moral and spiritual law. The ark had transitioned from a mobile diary of the desert journey to a fixed, unmoving testimony of the eternal covenant. This permanent, singular focus on the law in the Holy of Holies solidified its extreme sacredness and its role as the ultimate guarantor of Israel's relationship with the divine. It is with this understanding of the ark's contents, a singular, powerful focus on the law, that we now follow the ark out of the construction camp and into the dust and glory of its early life in the shadow of Sinai. With the ark now perfectly crafted and its essential contents sealed within, its active life began immediately, transforming the mobile camp of the Israelites from a chaotic multitude into an organized, moving sanctuary. This phase of the ark's existence is inextricably linked to to the tabernacle, the collapsible, exquisitely detailed tent that served as God's dwelling place on earth. The tabernacle was Moses' command center and the heart of the entire nomadic nation, and the ark was its soul, placed in the innermost, darkest chamber known as the Holy of Holies. Its purpose was to bridge the unbridgeable gap between the finite and the infinite. The function of the ark in this mobile sanctuary was to act as the contact point between the Creator and His creation. Above the mercy seat, between the outstretched wings of the golden cherubim, rested the tangible manifestation of the divine presence. By day, this presence was visible as a towering, majestic pillar of cloud, and by night as a pillar of fire. The cloud and the fire were the ultimate signs of God's acceptance and guardianship. Imagine the sheer visual impact on the thousands of Israelites who looked up and saw this ever-present, supernatural phenomenon looming over their camp. It was the constant, visible proof that they were a people set apart, under the direct protection of a power that eclipsed all earthly kings. The movement of this cloud dictated the movement of the entire nation. When the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the camp moved. When it settled, they rested. The rhythm of their lives was literally governed by the ark's location, making it the central, non-human decision maker for the entire community. The daily ritualistic logistics of the tabernacle were complex and critical, designed to protect both the people and the ark itself from the intensity of the divine power. The entire structure was divided by heavy curtains and veils, keeping the profane world at a safe distance. The outermost layer was the courtyard, where the people brought their sacrifices. Next came the holy place, accessible to the priests, where daily duties like burning incense and tending the lampstand took place. Finally, there was the Holy of Holies, the most sacred and restricted space, separated by a thick veil embroidered with cherubim. This veil was the final physical barrier between human life and the ark. Only Moses, and later the high priest, could enter this innermost chamber to speak with God above the ark. And even then, only on the Day of Atonement and under strict, terrifying conditions. This was not a casual visit. It required meticulous ritual preparation, including bathing, specific garments, and the offering of blood sacrifices, all designed to ensure the visitor was as pure as a mortal could be. The primary caretakers and movers of the ark were the Levites, specifically the Kohathite family, and their duty was the most dangerous in the camp. When the camp was about to move, the ark had to be prepared under strict, multi-layered ritual. First, the priests, Aaron and his sons, would enter the Holy of Holies after all appropriate sacrifices, and carefully cover the ark with the veil that normally hung before it. Then, a second covering of durable blue cloth was laid over that, completely obscuring the golden chest. Finally, a third covering of badger skins, a tough, weather-resistant leather, was applied to protect the sacred gold from the desert dust and sun. This triple layering ensured that not only was the ark untouched, but that its blinding glory was never accidentally seen. Crucially, the Levites carried the ark only by the permanently attached poles, never touching the chest itself. They carried it on their shoulders, walking with a slow, measured, and solemn pace at the front of the marching order, often 3 days ahead of the main body of the camp, pioneering their way through the wilderness. The narrative emphasizes the immense responsibility resting on the shoulders of these carriers. They were walking a fine, terrifying line between proximity to the holiest thing on earth and the lethal consequence of error. The very air around the ark was charged with the divine presence, making every step a potential act of sacred peril. The Levites were the chosen buffer, the human agents who ensured the safety of the ark from contamination and the safety of the people from the ark's unmediated power. This constant, visible reminder of God's power and the precise, terrifying rules surrounding it instilled a profound sense of reverence and fear in the Israelites. This fear was not abstract. It was a necessary component of worship. It taught them the absolute necessity of following the divine protocol to the letter. Any deviation, any moment of carelessness, any unauthorized approach to the ark was a violation of the sacred boundary, an act of trespass against the divine presence itself. The rules were designed to preserve life by maintaining distance. This intense concentration on rules and ritual, necessary to manage the raw, uncontained power of the ark, inevitably leads us to the moments when those rules were broken. It is a smooth transition from the prescribed order of the Levites, who upheld the boundary with their shoulders, to the tragic case of the man who, with seemingly good and protective intentions, violated that sacred distance, introducing the ultimate danger the ark posed to its very own caretakers. We turn now to one of the most sobering and terrifying narratives in the long history of the ark, the story of Uzzah. This single, dramatic event provides the clearest, most lethal illustration of the ark's unapproachable holiness and the absolute necessity of adhering to its divine transport protocol. It is a narrative that shocks modern sensibilities, but for the ancient Israelites, it was a terrifying confirmation of the boundary between the mortal and the divine. A line drawn in the desert centuries earlier that remained lethally effective. The scene takes place centuries after the Exodus, during the reign of King David, a period of national resurgence and reunification. David, having secured Jerusalem as his capital, was filled with pious zeal and longed to centralize the nation's religious life. He decided to bring the ark from the house of Abinadab, where it had rested for decades in the town of Kirjath-Jearim, to his new capital. The intention was magnificent, a moment of profound national and religious homecoming. However, the method chosen was flawed. David decided to transport the ark in a manner similar to how the Philistines, the enemies who did not know the law, had once returned it, on a new cart pulled by oxen. This choice, born of convenience or perhaps forgetting the detailed laws, was a profound violation of the law, established in the shadow of Sinai. The law explicitly demanded that the ark be carried only by the Levites, on their shoulders, using the permanent golden poles. It was never, under any circumstance, to be entrusted to a vehicle pulled by animals. The ark's dignity and danger required human, ritualistic attention. As the triumphant procession moved with great celebration, with David and all the house of Israel playing music and singing, The atmosphere was one of chaotic, joyful reverence. But joy soon turned to horror. The oxen stumbled at a place called the threshing floor of Nachan, likely jostled by the rough ground. The ark tilted precariously, threatening to fall from the cart to the dust. In a moment of panic and protective instinct, Uzzah, who was walking alongside the cart with his brother Ahio, reached out his hand and grasped the ark to steady it. His action was immediate, intended to protect the sacred object from desecration by contact with the profane ground. The result was instant and catastrophic. The scriptures state simply that the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and he struck him, and he died there before God. The triumphant procession immediately halted, replaced by a scene of shock, fear, and utter confusion. David himself was both displeased and terrified by this divine reaction, naming the place Perez Uzzah, meaning the break of Uzzah. The intended moment of joyful national reunion with the ark had turned into a tragic public execution. The severity of this judgment seems disproportionate to the crime. Uzzah's intention was not malicious, it was protective. He was trying to save the ark. The analysis of Uzzah's sin centers not on his intent, but on the profound violation of the boundary between the sacred and the profane. The ark was the ultimate conduit of God's immediate presence, and its holiness was fiercely guarded and non-negotiable. The rules for its handling, the poles, the shrouds, the designated carriers, were not suggestions. They were lethal safety protocols. Uzzah's touch, however well-meaning, broke the divine mandate and treated the ark as if it were a common, manageable piece of furniture that merely required stabilizing. His action implied a level of human control and familiarity that was utterly forbidden, treating the living presence as a piece of dead cargo. The lesson of Uzzah's fate was a terrifying one for Israel. God's holiness is not domesticable. It is unapproachable, and its laws must be obeyed absolutely. Even the highest concern, preventing the ark from falling, did not justify the violation of the means of its handling. The object of the covenant was to be feared, respected, and approached only on its own terms. The death of Uzzah did not diminish the ark's sanctity. It magnified it, turning the chest into an object that even its devoted followers dared not approach incorrectly. After this disaster, David refused to bring the ark further into Jerusalem, terrified of its power, and instead diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite, where it remained for 3 months. The subsequent blessing on Obed-Edom's household proved that the ark was not inherently cursed, but only lethally dangerous when the rules of the covenant were ignored. The ark's power was a neutral force, bringing either blessing or death, entirely dependent on human obedience. The sobering lesson of this unsanctioned touch forced David to reassess the entire operation, necessitating a return to the original, forgotten protocols, providing the necessary context for the ark's subsequent correct use as a powerful and terrifying military tool when carried by those who respected its sacred laws. The ark's history is a study in profound contradictions. It was a peaceful repository of law, yet it was also the most devastating weapon ever deployed in battle. As we consider its long journey, we must pause to explore its central, terrifying role in ancient warfare, most famously at the Battle of Jericho. This narrative shift highlights the ark's unique duality. an object of profound worship and the ultimate, overwhelming instrument of divine intervention against the enemies of Israel. The defining moment of the ark as a military instrument occurred shortly after the Israelites, led by Joshua, crossed the Jordan River and confronted the formidable, heavily fortified city of Jericho. This was not a battle won by siege engines, archers, or superior human strategy. It was won by ritual, obedience, and the silent, terrifying presence of the ark. The instructions given to Joshua were bizarre by any standard of military engagement. The army was commanded not to attack, not to fight, but to march. For 6 consecutive days, the armed men were commanded to march once around the circumference of the city. The order of the procession was critical. The armed guard led the way, followed by the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and then followed by the 7 priests bearing trumpets made of ram's horns, the shofars, which were to sound a continuous low blast. The rest of the army marched in silent, absolute obedience. Imagine the scene from the perspective of the people locked behind the massive double walls of Jericho. Day after day, a silent, surreal parade circled their city. It must have been psychologically unsettling, an unnerving display of power that worked entirely outside the known rules of siege warfare. The silent, measured steps of the procession emphasized the solemnity and the divine nature of the impending judgment, suggesting a fate far greater than any mere human army could deliver. The only sound for those 6 days, aside from the footsteps and the rhythmic flapping of the leather covering the ark, was the haunting, liturgical blast of the shofars, horns of worship and warning, not conventional battle cries. On the 7th day, the ritual intensified dramatically. The Israelites were commanded to circle the city not once, but 7 times. This number, symbolic of completeness and perfection, underscored the divine preparation for the final act. As they completed the final circuit, the priests sounded one long, continuous, piercing blast on the trumpets. Then, upon Joshua's command, the entire army broke the long silence and shouted, a unified, thunderous roar of voices raised to the heavens. It was not the shout that destroyed the city, but the final, collective, perfect act of obedience, amplified and made efficacious by the power contained within the ark. The destruction that followed was instantaneous and absolute. The immense, seemingly impenetrable stone walls of Jericho simply collapsed in place, sinking down to their foundations and allowing the Israelite army to rush straight up and into the city. The ark, having completed its military function, had demonstrated its terrifying power as the physical embodiment of a covenant that fought for its own people. It wasn't the sound of the trumpets or the shout of the people that brought the walls down. It was the power contained within that golden chest, released upon the city through the exactitude of the divine ritual and the total obedience of its carriers. This victory established the ark's reputation as a fearsome, non-traditional weapon. It confirmed that when Israel was in obedience, the ark guaranteed victory, transforming war into a form of ritualistic judgment. The ark became a potent psychological deterrent, a symbol that promised absolute success when wielded according to the divine protocol. However, this very success held the seeds of future disaster, leading to a profound misunderstanding. The dazzling victory at Jericho eventually led the Israelites to misuse the ark, treating it not as a sacred presence requiring moral commitment, but as a magic charm or a guaranteed piece of supernatural weaponry. They began to believe that the ark itself, divorced from the moral and spiritual commitment of the covenant, could ensure victory against any foe. This dangerous human arrogance, the belief that the power could be summoned simply by carrying the box, set the stage for one of the nation's greatest calamities. It is this hubris, the belief that such a powerful object could remain safe forever and be manipulated at will, that directly leads to its capture and the disastrous loss to the Philistines, marking the beginning of the ark's dark captivity. The hubris that followed the triumphs of the ark led directly to its darkest period, its capture by the Philistines. This event, occurring at a time when the Israelites were suffering military defeats due to a profound moral and spiritual decline, serves as a powerful testament to the ark's ability to defend its own sanctity, even when abandoned or misused by its designated caretakers. When the ark fell into enemy hands, the world learned, in a terrible and visceral way, that its power could not be contained, controlled, or co-opted for profane ends. The disaster began at the Battle of Aphek and Ebenezer. The Israelites, facing a losing military engagement against the powerful Philistines, decided to bring the ark from its resting place in Shiloh to the battlefield. They openly stated their belief that its mere presence would guarantee victory, regardless of the rampant moral corruption and priestly misbehavior that had plagued their society. This was the ultimate misuse of the sacred object, treating it as a superstitious amulet rather than a symbol of a conditional covenant that demanded obedience and purity. The result was catastrophic. The total defeat of the Israelite army, the death of thousands of soldiers, the killing of the priests' sons, and the terrifying capture of the ark itself. The Ark of the Covenant, the dwelling place of God's immediate presence, was hauled away as a spoil of war by the uncircumcised Philistines. The Philistines, triumphant in their unexpected victory, carried the ark to their central city of Ashdod and placed it directly inside the temple of their chief deity, Dagon, positioning it as a trophy beneath the idol of their god. Dagon was typically depicted as a merman-like figure, half man and half fish, representing their mastery of the sea and agriculture. The ark was meant to be a testament to Dagon's supremacy over the captured Israelite deity, a symbol of their political and divine dominance. The next morning, the Philistine priests arrived at the temple to find a shocking scene. The massive statue of Dagon had mysteriously fallen face down on the ground before the ark, bowing in profound, forced submission. The priests, bewildered, restored the heavy idol to its pedestal, dismissing the event as a fluke or a structural failure. But the following morning brought an even more terrifying, explicit occurrence. Dagon's statue had fallen again, and this time its head and both of its hands had been completely severed and lay broken on the threshold of the temple. The message was clear and visceral. The God of the ark was not only present, but had defeated their chief deity in his own house, stripping him of his intellect and power and rendering him utterly helpless. The terror did not end there. A wave of affliction began to sweep through the Philistine cities that housed the ark. The people of Ashdod, and subsequently Gath and Ekron, were afflicted with what the text describes as tumors or boils, often identified as buboes associated with plague. accompanied by widespread panic and fear. The plague followed the ark wherever it went, demonstrating its uncontained, lethal power against those who did not revere it or who possessed it unlawfully. The chest of pure gold became a curse, a bomb of divine power that devastated their population. Even the gold of the chest could not buy them safety from the invisible force within. The Philistines quickly realized that the ark was not a trophy, but a terrible burden. It was an object that violently defended its sanctity and would not tolerate the presence of foreign gods or people who did not observe its profound rules. The panic was absolute, and the priests and rulers desperately sought counsel on how to rid themselves of the holy box. They understood, perhaps better than the contemporary Israelites, that the power of the ark was real and inescapable. The terror the ark instilled in its captors is the main focus of this segment, proving that the ark was a force unto itself, capable of asserting the supremacy of its God, even while captive. This desperate, unified desire of the Philistines to expel the cursed object, fearing further destruction, will lead directly to their bizarre and fear-driven plan for its return journey, which they undertook in an act of propitiation, testing the very source of the plagues. This frantic expulsion is the perfect introduction to the ark's strange trip back to its own land. The Philistine nightmare had reached its absolute peak. The relentless plague of tumors and the humiliating defeat of their god Dagon convinced the 5 Philistine lords that the captive ark was not a trophy, but a divine weapon aimed squarely at their civilization. They knew they had to be rid of it, but fear prevented them from simply dumping it, knowing that would invite further wrath. Their decision was a bizarre, fearful experiment designed to test whether the plagues were a random misfortune or truly the act of the God of Israel. Their plan was a profound mixture of careful ritual and calculated risk, an attempt to pass responsibility for the dreaded box back to its originators. First, they prepared a guilt offering, an act of propitiation designed to appease the vengeful power. They crafted 5 golden replicas of the tumors that had afflicted their people, and 5 golden replicas of mice, which were thought to have spread the deadly pestilence. These golden images were placed alongside the ark as a desperate form of apology and acknowledgement of sin. They were admitting their god, Dagon, was powerless against the force contained within the golden chest. Next came the most unusual part of the plan, the return method. They built a new wooden cart, a choice still forbidden by the Israelite law, but understandable for those who dared not touch the ark's golden poles, and placed the ark upon it, along with the golden offering. Then they took 2 milk cows that had never been yoked, animals with calves, and harnessed them to the cart. This was the crux of their experiment. Cows, possessing a natural instinct to return to their calves, would normally turn and follow the shortest path home. If the cows ignored this powerful natural urge, leaving their young behind, and instead walked directly toward the Israelite border without human guidance, the Philistines would know for certain that the plagues and the downfall of Dagon were the result of the God of the ark, and not mere chance. The moment the cows were released was charged with fear and anticipation. The Philistine lords and priests watched from a distance as the cart began its journey, The two cows, lowing mournfully for their young, turned their backs on their calves and, guided by an unseen hand, took the road that led straight to the Israelite territory of Beth Shemesh. The ark moved relentlessly, steadily, without deviation, until it crossed the border. The Philistines watched until the ark vanished from sight. Their experiment concluded. The terrifying box was truly a symbol of overwhelming divine power, confirming their defeat. The ark's arrival at Beth Shemesh was met with joyful amazement by the Israelites. The inhabitants were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley when they saw the cart, pulled by the cows, approaching their land. Their joy at the return of the sacred chest was immense, a restoration of national honor after a devastating loss. They immediately sacrificed the cows and even broke up the cart for firewood, offering the animals to God in a spontaneous act of thanksgiving. The ark, for the moment, was safe and home. However, the shadow of Uzzah's fate loomed over this joyful reunion. The people of Beth Shemesh, perhaps overcome by curiosity, familiarity, or a reckless sense of ownership, committed the third great error regarding the ark's sanctity. Some of them dared to look inside the ark. The chest, which had been sealed from the eyes of the Philistines by 3 layers of cloth, was now opened and violated by its own people. The biblical account is sobering and absolute. A great number of the Beth Shemesh citizens were instantly struck down. This second instance of divine judgment for unauthorized viewing reinforced the boundary between the sacred and the profane with brutal clarity. The ark was not a relic to be examined or displayed. It was the boundary line of God's presence, and that presence was lethal to the impure. The tragedy turned their joy into immediate terror. The people of Beth Shemesh cried out in fear, realizing that even within their own territory, the ark remained a terrifying and volatile force. They could not keep it, nor could they dare to touch it. They sent messengers to the neighboring city of Kirjath-jearim, pleading with them to take the deadly box away. The continued danger of the ark's presence necessitated a long period of quiet, respectful storage. The ark was eventually taken to the house of Abinadab in Kirjath-jearim, where it remained for decades, resting silently on a hill, a constant, humbling reminder of the necessity of ritual observance and the fierce cost of curiosity. This long, quiet storage would eventually introduce King David's decision to bring the ark to his new capital, Jerusalem, attempting to end its wandering and make it the final, central piece of his kingdom. The time of the ark's silent rest in the house of Abinadab had stretched into 20 long years, a period that felt like a quiet exile. This duration was a kind of national quietude and religious stagnation, a long, humbling pause after the terrible, immediate judgment that followed the capture. The ark, the heart of the nation's faith, sat in a private home far removed from the center of power. But the accession of King David to the throne signaled a seismic shift. David, a man of profound spiritual passion and strategic brilliance, understood that his political capital in Jerusalem would remain incomplete without the religious authority embodied in the sacred chest. He was determined to end the ark's long wandering and make it the true centerpiece of his new kingdom. David had learned the brutal lesson of Uzzah's death during his first failed attempt, that zeal alone was insufficient, and that divine protocol must be strictly observed. His second attempt to bring the ark to Jerusalem was meticulous, an operation guided by fear, reverence, and absolute adherence to the ancient laws of the covenant. This final journey to the city would be a moment of profound triumph, marked not by silent fear, but by explosive, chaotic, and ultimately controversial celebration. David ensured that the Levites, specifically the sons of Kohath, the family consecrated for this dangerous and sacred task, were properly purified and ready. They carried the ark on their shoulders using the permanently attached golden poles, thus ensuring no direct human contact with the wooden and gold chest. The procession that ensued was less a simple journey and more a rolling, ambulatory worship service, a stark contrast to the accidental chaos of the cart that had cost Uzzah his life. Every 6 measured steps the carriers took, David meticulously stopped the entire procession and offered a sacrifice of oxen and fatlings. This ritual established a rhythm of worship that constantly acknowledged the sanctity, the danger, and the immense privilege of the burden they bore. The entire route was transformed into an act of constant atonement and thanksgiving, sanctifying every inch of the road leading to the city of David. As the procession neared Jerusalem, the atmosphere transformed. The solemnity of the ritual gave way to an unrestrained explosion of communal joy. King David, the anointed monarch of Israel, himself led the celebration, not with the reserved dignity expected of royalty, but with an extraordinary, even scandalous, lack of royal decorum. He was not dressed in his heavy, kingly robes of purple and fine linen, clothes that symbolized his earthly authority. Instead, he wore a simple linen ephod, a garment typically associated with the common priesthood, perhaps even just a simple undergarment of linen. In this simple tunic, David symbolically shed his political kingship and threw off all royal restraint. He began to dance before the ark with all his might. This was not a stately, measured movement befitting a courtier. It was a frantic, leaping, whirling expression of genuine, passionate, even ecstatic worship. His body was fully engaged in the expression of his soul's joy. He was not just performing a state ritual. He was pouring out his entire being in public ecstasy, leaping and shouting with the common folk, making himself utterly one with the joyous chaos of the multitude. This public, frenzied display was shocking for the time, a profound blurring of the lines between the powerful king and the simplest, most humble worshiper. It was a visible declaration that his true loyalty was not to his own throne, but to the invisible presence contained within the chest. The joyful chaos of the public celebration, however, was observed with cold disdain by one person. Michal, David's wife and the daughter of the former, deposed King Saul. From a window high in the palace, secured behind the thick stones of the royal residence, she watched the man she considered her royal husband exposing himself. In her eyes, the simple linen garment and his passionate movements were scandalous, a humiliating diminution of his kingly dignity. Her reaction, rooted in the old, formal, aristocratic sense of kingship, was one of profound contempt and scorn. When David returned to the palace, after successfully placing the ark in its temporary tent, Michal confronted him with bitterness, her words sharp and accusatory. She chastised him sharply, saying he had uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. She saw his passion as vulgar, a diminution of his kingly authority and his majesty in the eyes of the populace. She believed the king's power was diminished by such an overt display of humility and vulnerability. This dramatic moment highlights the deep, enduring tension between formal ritual and genuine, passionate worship that ran through the entire history of the Ark. For Michal, the Ark's arrival should have been marked by sober, reserved majesty, affirming the dignity of the monarchy and the distance between the ruler and the ruled. For David, the arrival of the divine presence was an event that demanded the abandonment of all earthly dignity and pride. His defense was direct, forceful, and eternally defiant. He declared that he was dancing before the Lord, who had chosen him over her father, Saul, to rule Israel. He stated unequivocally that he was willing to become even more undignified, even more humble, for the sake of his God. He valued his relationship with the divine above the constraints of his human crown. David's success in finally bringing the Ark into a specially prepared tent in the city of David marked a new glorious era for the unified nation of Israel. The Ark was centralized, giving Jerusalem a religious authority that matched its political power. This act of unification made Jerusalem the spiritual capital it remains today. The Ark was now poised for its ultimate destination, waiting for the permanent, magnificent structure that only David's son, Solomon, would be permitted to build. This moment of profound triumph ends the Ark's long wandering and sets the stage for a necessary reflection on its previous, lesser-known, yet critically important stationary home, where it rested for centuries before the Philistine calamity. To truly appreciate the final, glorious permanence that awaited the Ark in Jerusalem, we must first look back to the long, quiet interlude that predated the tumult of the Philistine wars and David's reign. Before it was placed in a tent in David's new capital, and centuries before it was housed in the final splendor of Solomon's temple, the Ark enjoyed a long, profoundly significant period of stability in a place called Shiloh. This ancient location, central to the early Israelite tribal lands, served as the primary religious center for centuries. A place so important, it is often referred to as the first true, settled home for the tabernacle and the Ark after the initial, chaotic wandering in the wilderness ceased. The segment of history spent here, often overlooked, is crucial for understanding the Ark's enduring power and the fragility of human institutions built around it. The Ark rested at Shiloh for a staggering period, estimated to be around 300 years, stretching from the time of Joshua, who first organized the new land, until the devastating military defeat and capture by the Philistines. During this era, the magnificent collapsible tabernacle, constructed from acacia wood and fine textiles, was set up semi-permanently. The Ark rested within its innermost chamber, the Holy of Holies, creating a stationary, gravity-inducing center for the previously nomadic covenant. The life of the Ark during this extensive period was one of intended stillness. It did not move. It did not lead armies into battle, and it rarely, if ever, left its inner sanctum. It was the silent, solemn, unmoving heart of a nation struggling to define itself and transition from a collection of loosely allied tribes into a single, cohesive entity within the Promised Land. The nature of worship at Shiloh was less centralized and certainly less grand than the spectacular rites that would later define the temple in Jerusalem. However, it was vital for the establishment of national identity. The people gathered here annually for major pilgrimage feasts, fulfilling the commandments to appear before the Lord. They offered their sacrifices, dedicated their children, and sought divine counsel through the high priest who served as the intermediary. Shiloh was the site where the prophet Samuel, one of the greatest figures in Israelite history, first heard the voice of God as a child, serving under the aged priest Eli. This established the site as a nexus of prophecy and divine communication. This long period of quiet reverence, however, was fundamentally marred by corruption. The priests who served the ark at Shiloh, the sons of Eli, were notorious for their abuse of their sacred office. They treated the sacrifices brought by the faithful with contempt, seizing the best portions unlawfully, and committed serious moral violations on the very threshold of the tabernacle. They were, in essence, desecrating the very ground around the structure designed to hold the ark. This internal corruption foreshadowed the disaster to come, suggesting that the ark's power and protection were fundamentally conditional, dependent not just on the performance of the ritual, but on the profound moral integrity of its chosen caretakers. The quiet sanctuary of Shiloh began to crumble not from an external assault, but from a decay that started within. The ultimate mysterious ruin of Shiloh is a powerful and sobering historical footnote. When the Philistines soundly defeated the Israelites at the Battle of Aphek and captured the ark, they did not just take the box. They seemingly annihilated Shiloh. The tabernacle, though possibly dismantled and moved by some survivors, effectively vanished from central history, and the city itself was utterly destroyed and abandoned. While the biblical account does not detail the physical destruction with journalistic clarity, later prophets, such as Jeremiah, would use the ruin of Shiloh as a dire, frightening warning to the later, complacent kings of Judah, reminding them that God would abandon even the most ancient and hallowed ground if the covenant was broken through immorality and idolatry. The prophetic allusions suggest a thorough, devastating end that marked the termination of an entire era. Archaeological evidence at the site of Shiloh strongly supports this narrative of sudden destruction. Excavations reveal signs of a major, widespread conflagration and a sudden, violent end to the settlement during the period consistent with the Philistine invasion around the 11th century BC. The city vanished abruptly from the narrative and remained largely desolate for centuries, its memory lingering only as a shadow of former glory and a powerful cautionary tale against spiritual pride. The powerful contrast between the stability of Shiloh, which became a total ruin, and the dynamic journey of the ark, which survived capture and destruction, is profound. The ark survived the annihilation of its home and continued its history. The holy place itself did not. This fact underscores the critical theological point that the true sanctuary was not the physical structure, the building, or the territory, but the invisible, portable presence associated with the ark itself. The ark's rescue and subsequent installation in David's city symbolized a fresh start, a necessary purification of the national religious life away from the memory of Shiloh's disgrace and eventual decay. It was now ready to move toward its intended, permanent, future glory To truly appreciate the final home of the ark and the perfect, terrifying silence of the Holy of Holies, we must conduct a close examination of the most detailed and theologically complex part of its construction: the mercy seat and the two golden cherubim. These figures, often overlooked in the narrative of battles and journeys, were not mere ornamentation. They were the key elements that defined the function of the ark and represented the literal boundary and throne of the divine presence on earth. Their specific design, the material from which they were formed, and their attitude of silent guardianship are vital for understanding the concentrated, fearful atmosphere of the sanctuary. The lid of the ark, known as the kaporet or mercy seat, was unique in its creation. It was made of solid gold, not just acacia wood plated with gold, but a slab of the precious metal hammered out of one single piece. This Hebrew word, kaporet, is intrinsically and etymologically linked to the concept of atonement, suggesting that the lid itself was the primary instrument through which God's forgiveness and mercy were manifested. It was upon this single golden surface that the high priest, once a year on the most solemn day of atonement, the Yom Kippur, sprinkled the blood of sacrifice. This ritual was the means of making propitiation for the collective sins and impurities of the entire nation, serving as the only spot in the world where the perfect reconciliation between a sinful, mortal people and a holy, transcendent God could physically occur. Out of the ends of this continuous, solid gold slab, two cherubim were formed. These were not generic statues to be admired or worshipped, which would have violated the second commandment. Rather, they were elaborate, winged figures kneeling opposite one another, facing inward toward the center of the mercy seat. Their majestic wings were spread high, forming a protective, golden canopy that arched over the very top of the chest. They were positioned as the silent, unmoving guardians of the covenant, mirroring the fierce celestial beings placed at the Garden of Eden after the expulsion of Adam and Eve to guard the way to the forbidden tree of life. In the tabernacle, they performed an analogous role, guarding the divine presence from casual or unauthorized access and reminding the worshiper that this was the most serious, most restricted threshold of the sacred mystery. The existence of these golden figures is fascinating because the law absolutely forbade the making of any graven images. Yet these very specific golden figures were commanded by God Himself. This apparent paradox is resolved by their function and context. They were not gods to be adored, but structural, symbolic components of the divine throne. They were forever fixed in an attitude of worship and guardianship, their purpose strictly functional and theological. Their inward-gazing posture, forever focused on the gold space between their wings, was a powerful visual cue, suggesting that the focus of all creation, even the highest celestial beings, was directed toward the empty, immaterial space above the lid. That empty space was the most sacred spot on earth. The void above the mercy seat, where the glory cloud of God's invisible presence, the Shekinah, was understood to rest and communicate with Moses and, later, the high priest. The cherubim served as the supportive structure, the visual anchors of the throne, but the true king remained invisible, dwelling in the immaterial space framed by the gold, the wood, and the shadow of the wings. The subtle, unmoving stability of the ark's two-winged cherubim stands in striking contrast to the description of the four-faced, four-winged, fiercely dynamic cherubim seen in the terrifying visions of the prophet Ezekiel centuries later. Ezekiel's creatures were mobile, complex, full of eyes, and moved like lightning, symbols of God's omnipresence and cosmic, chaotic power that transcended all earthly boundaries. The ark's cherubim, however, were static, fixed in place, and focused entirely on the conditional terms of the Mosaic covenant. They represented the contained, localized, promised presence of God, dwelling specifically among his covenant people, ready to meet them for the specific, defined purpose of atonement. Understanding the cherubim's silent, unmoving role is paramount for appreciating the finality and atmosphere of the temple. They were the ultimate theological guarantee, the perfect, silent witnesses to every event in the ark's history. They had survived the chaos of the desert, the destruction of Shiloh, and the profane capture by the Philistines. They had witnessed the striking down of Uzzah and the blessing of Obed-Edom. They were now ready to take their final, permanent place in the most stable, most magnificent structure ever conceived, preparing for the description of the finished temple and the final, sacred act of installation under the hand of King Solomon. The ark's long, volatile, and profoundly eventful history of wandering and temporary shifting homes finally reached its majestic and definitive climax under the glorious reign of King Solomon, the son of David. David had passionately intended to build a permanent, fitting house for the ark, a structure of granite and gold that would silence the memory of tents and temporary settlements forever. However, the task of constructing the glorious first temple, a true masterpiece of architecture, religious artistry, and wealth, fell to Solomon. The temple was designed to be the physical embodiment of Israel's permanence and newfound political and economic power. And the ark was the sacred, irreplaceable object for which the entire colossal structure was conceived and executed. Solomon oversaw the construction of a building that was, by all accounts, transcendent. It dwarfed the simple, easily disassembled tabernacle of the wilderness in every possible dimension. It was built of carefully cut stone and Lebanon cedar, overlaid everywhere, wall and floor, with sheets of pure gold. The innermost sanctuary of this magnificent complex, the Holy of Holies, was a perfect cubic room, its walls and floor covered entirely in pure gold. It was a chamber of such intense, concentrated preciousness and darkness that it was designed to be the most valuable, most restricted, and most sacred room on earth. This room was not just a container. It was the sacred, eternal stage for the ark. The day of the ark's installation was the pinnacle of Solomon's entire reign, and the single, defining moment the temple became consecrated. The final procession was the most solemn and magnificent in Israel's history. The priests, accompanied by all the elders of Israel, carried the ark from its temporary resting place in David's tent in Jerusalem, up the hill, and into the newly completed temple structure. The ark was still, in adherence to the absolute law, carried on the shoulders of the consecrated Levites, the poles remaining in the gold rings, ensuring that the ancient sacred protocol was honored even in this moment of ultimate, unprecedented grandeur. The ark was meticulously placed in the exact center of the Holy of Holies, a spot designated as the axis of the earth, resting precisely beneath the final, magnificent additions to the sanctuary. These additions were two colossal, newly carved olive wood cherubim, overlaid entirely with gold. Unlike the smaller, ark-mounted cherubim on the mercy seat, these figures were enormous, monuments of silent adoration, each standing 15 feet high, with wings spanning 15 feet. They stood sentinel on either side of the ark, their outstretched wings touching both the walls of the chamber and touching each other, forming a vast, shimmering canopy over the smaller, original cherubim and the mercy seat below. The ark was thus symbolically nested within a physical manifestation of continuous celestial guardianship, secured not only by its own angels, but by the enormous, silent golden sentinels of the temple. The moment the priests withdrew from the chamber, having set the ark in its final, immovable resting place, the divine confirmation came with terrifying speed. The scriptures describe a sudden, overwhelming, and magnificent event. The glory of the Lord, the Shekinah, manifested as a cloud so thick, bright, and intense that it immediately filled the entire temple structure, streaming from the Holy of Holies out into the inner and outer courts. The cloud was so overwhelming, so powerful, that the priests, dedicated as they were, could not stand to minister or even remain in the building. They were driven out by the sheer, unapproachable power of the divine presence that had just taken up permanent residence. This was the ultimate, unmistakable sign that the structure was accepted, and the ark had reached its designated, everlasting destination. The presence that once hovered over the small, easily moved desert tabernacle had now permanently filled the colossal temple, validating the entire decades-long project. Solomon then offered a great prayer of dedication before the people, standing at the great brazen altar, acknowledging with humility that no building, no matter how magnificent, could truly contain the transcendent God of Israel, but that this place was designated for the manifestation of his name and the answering of prayer. The ark was sealed away, hidden behind the heavy, gold-covered doors of the inner sanctum. The finality of this placement was absolute and clear. The ark would never again move under normal circumstances. It was now the silent, beating, golden heart of the world, hidden from all human eyes, awaiting the long, peaceful reign of Solomon and beginning its new, final history as the unmoving anchor of the temple. With the ark finally and immovably resting in the Holy of Holies, secured beneath the colossal wings of Solomon's cherubim, its public life ceased entirely. It was no longer a visible object, a standard to be carried, or a trophy to be won. It became a profound mystery, sealed within the core of the Golden Temple, the unseen center of the universe. This chapter focuses entirely on the intense sanctity and the terrifying isolation of that space, a room that existed at the absolute zenith of sacredness on earth. The Holy of Holies was separated from the rest of the temple, the holy place where the priests ministered daily, by the single, crucial barrier, a heavy, thick curtain known as the veil. The veil was not a mere curtain of cloth. It was a structure of immense symbolic weight and physical substance, embroidered with figures of cherubim and woven from the most luxurious and symbolic threads, blue, purple, and scarlet linen. Its purpose was to contain the intense, raw power of the divine presence resting on the ark, acting as a final physical safeguard that protected the entire world from the Shekinah glory cloud that had filled the sanctuary. To pierce this veil, even accidentally, was to invite instantaneous death. It was the absolute boundary between the mortal and the infinite, ensuring that the ark, the closest point to God, remained perpetually unapproachable. The ark was in the world, but it was utterly separate from the world, and the veil was the silent, massive guardian of that separation. The silence within the Holy of Holies was complete and permanent. No lamps were permitted to shine there, relying only on the reflected, deep yellow glow from the gold-plated walls and the massive golden cherubim. No incense was burned there on a daily basis, and no human voice was heard. The ark was completely alone in the darkness, a monument of absolute stillness. The priests who served daily in the adjacent holy place knew the ark was merely feet away, but they understood that the smallest infraction, the slightest deviation from purity, would be lethal. The sanctity of the space required extreme measures of separation and purification, reinforcing the idea that the power contained within the golden chest was terrifying and fundamentally unapproachable. Entry into this chamber, the most sacred place on earth, was dictated by ritualistic necessity and restricted to one man, one moment, in 1 year. Only the high priest was permitted to pass beyond the veil, and only on the Day of Atonement, known as Yom Kippur. The rituals leading up to this annual visit were the most exhaustive and frightening in the entire Israelite calendar. The high priest had to undergo rigorous self-purification, including multiple changes of clothes and baths, to shed his ordinary identity and prepare for his extraordinary task. He wore not the usual elaborate, gold-plated priestly garments, but simple, pure white linen vestments, symbolizing profound humility and purity, recognizing that no amount of gold or earthly splendor could make him worthy of entering the divine presence. The purpose of his entry was to perform the core act of the covenant, the atonement for the sins of the entire nation. The high priest entered carrying a censer filled with coals and incense, ensuring that a dense cloud of fragrant smoke covered the mercy seat before he even saw it. This was an indispensable safety measure, serving as a further buffer, a self-made cloud to shield him from the consuming light of the divine glory resting between the cherubim. He then sprinkled the sacrificial blood of a bull and a goat onto the mercy seat itself, making propitiation for his own sins and those of the people. This act reaffirmed the very condition of the covenant, that human life was sustained only through the constant, merciful offering of substitutionary blood. The high priest's exit from the Holy of Holies was met with intense relief by the people waiting outside. His survival was the annual assurance that God had accepted their atonement, and the nation would be granted another year of life. The profundity of this annual visit underscored the ark's central theological role. It was the focus of both God's judgment and his mercy. The terrifying and unapproachable power of the ark necessitated such extreme life or death measures of separation and purity. The entire architecture of the temple was built to protect the human world from the power it housed. This complete separation and sanctity, however, created a unique historical problem. Because the ark was permanently sealed away, rarely accessed, and protected by absolute divine decree, it had no visible, active history for over 3 centuries of the First Temple's existence. Its story, effectively, went silent. The profound secrecy and guarded mystery of the Holy of Holies, which kept the ark perfectly safe, naturally leads to the question of its eventual disappearance. How could an object of such unparalleled sanctity, sealed in the most secure room in the world, simply vanish? This silence in the historical record transitions us to the final, fleeting moment where the ark is mentioned, just before its profound disappearance. The ark's long period of silence within the Holy of Holies was broken by one brief, curious mention during the turbulent reign of King Josiah, providing the final, explicit reference to the sacred chest in the entire biblical narrative. This fleeting moment, occurring approximately 3 centuries after the ark was installed by Solomon, offers a powerful glimpse into the internal struggles of the temple and the impending doom that was beginning to gather over Jerusalem. The account of Josiah's reform is the historical cutoff point, the last time we see the ark with certainty before it vanishes into the shadows of war and legend. Josiah was a deeply righteous king who ascended the throne of Judah amidst a period of profound spiritual decay. His predecessors, particularly Manasseh and Amon, had reversed the reforms of earlier good kings, introducing pagan worship, idolatry, and even child sacrifice directly into the holy city, and disturbingly, even within the temple grounds itself. Altars to foreign deities had been erected in Jerusalem, and the sanctity of the temple had been profoundly contaminated by these profane acts. The temple, intended as the single home of the ark, had become a house of many gods, a terrifying violation of the covenant. In the 18th year of his reign, Josiah initiated a sweeping, violent, and complete religious reform. He set about cleansing the temple of all idolatrous items and repairing the long-neglected structure. It was during this massive temple restoration project that the high priest Hilkiah made a stunning discovery. The original book of the law, which had been lost or hidden for generations, was found. The rediscovery of this book profoundly shocked Josiah and accelerated his zeal to restore the covenant to its original, pure form. It is within the context of this purification and restoration that the final mention of the ark occurs. Josiah issues a direct command to the Levites concerning the sacred chest. Put the holy ark in the house which Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, built. It shall no longer be a burden on your shoulders. This command is cryptic, yet intensely revealing. It suggests, definitively, that the ark was not in its proper place in the Holy of Holies at that time. It had been moved. The prevailing analysis of this brief mention is that the ark had been removed and secreted away to save it from the very kings who had introduced idolatry into the temple. Earlier, wicked kings like Manasseh would have had no compunction about desecrating or even destroying the ark to make room for their own pagan idols. The ark, being the ultimate symbol of the one true God, would have been the first target for removal or desecration. It is highly probable that a group of pious priests, recognizing the danger, had secretly taken the ark from the Holy of Holies, a technically forbidden act, but one driven by the higher purpose of preserving the sacred artifact, and hidden it somewhere on the temple grounds, perhaps in a storeroom, a crypt, or a subterranean tunnel. Josiah's command was simply to return it to its rightful place. Now that the idolatrous threats had been forcibly removed, this single verse serves as the historical cutoff point. The ark is returned to its sanctuary, and the narrative never speaks of it again. The historical circumstances surrounding this final placement were fraught with immense peril. Though Josiah's reform was successful, the geopolitical situation was disastrous. The Babylonian Empire was rising, posing an existential threat to Judah. The ark was placed back in the Holy of Holies right as the final years of the kingdom began, a time of impending war and terror. The chapter concludes by highlighting the immense anxiety surrounding the ark's security, even as it rested in its designated home. Josiah's reign was tragically cut short in battle, and his successors were weak, returning almost immediately to the wicked practices he had violently suppressed. Within a generation, the Babylonian armies would surround Jerusalem, laying siege to the city and the temple. The ark, newly restored to its secret dwelling, was now directly in the path of the most devastating destruction the nation had ever faced. The question of how to preserve it, to hide it, move it, or let it fall into the hands of a conquering foreign army must have dominated the final, terrifying moments before the cataclysm, transitioning us directly to the terrifying destruction that erased it from recorded history. The anxious years following King Josiah's brief, glorious reform gave way to the inevitable, terrifying reality. The shadow of the Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, grew dark and vast, eventually consuming the kingdom of Judah. In 586 BCE, the city of Jerusalem fell after a brutal siege, and the fate of the nation, the temple, and the ark itself was sealed. This event was the single most catastrophic moment in Israelite history, and it is the moment when the ark, the centerpiece of their faith for nearly a millennium, simply vanishes from the official historical record. The destruction of the first temple was an act of calculated, devastating policy. Nebuchadnezzar's forces sought to eliminate the religious and political independence of Judah by utterly dismantling its most precious symbols. The temple, Solomon's masterpiece, was systematically stripped, sacked, and finally burned to the ground. This chapter narrates the horrific plunder of the temple vessels and treasures, an act of historical bookkeeping that inadvertently creates the central mystery of the ark. Historical texts, particularly the books of Kings and Jeremiah, provide meticulous, detailed lists of the plunder carried away to Babylon. These inventories of stolen objects are astonishing in their precision. The texts describe the Babylonians taking away the huge bronze vessels, the pillars of bronze known as Jachin and Boaz, the brazen altar, the shovels, the fire pans, the golden bowls, the silver utensils, the great bronze sea, a massive ritual washing basin, and the smaller bronze lavers. Every known, valuable artifact that could be easily moved was carefully recorded and designated for transport to Nebuchadnezzar's palace in Babylon as a trophy of Shah. The looting was thorough, designed to ensure that the temple could never function again as a center of independent worship. Yet, amidst this exhaustive inventory of temple treasures, From the grandest bronze pillar to the smallest golden bowl, there is a striking, profound, and utterly inexplicable omission. The lists of plundered items meticulously catalog every piece of gold and bronze, but they never once mention the Ark of the Covenant. The golden chest, the most valuable, most sacred, and most symbolically important artifact in the entire structure, is simply not listed among the spoils. It is as if the central piece of the temple did not exist. This deafening silence is the pivot point for all subsequent lost ark theories. The historical record suggests one of three possibilities, each weighted with uncertainty and intrigue. First, that the ark was, indeed, taken by the Babylonians, but its unique religious significance led the chronicler, or perhaps the Babylonians themselves, to exclude it from a list of standard monetary plunder. This seems unlikely, given the meticulousness of the other lists. Second, that the ark was destroyed on the spot, perhaps broken down by the invaders to melt its pure gold overlay and mercy's seat, rendering it unrecognizable. This would be an act of utter desecration that would have surely warranted a horrified mention by the surviving priests. The third and most compelling possibility in the context of our earlier chapter on Josiah is that the ark was never captured at all. It suggests that in the final, desperate days of the siege, perhaps remembering the earlier incident during Josiah's reign, the priests of the temple acted to save the sacred chest from desecration. They may have removed it from the Holy of Holies and hidden it in a deep, secret vault beneath the Temple Mount, or smuggled it out of the city entirely, ensuring that the ark did not fall into the hands of the pagan invaders. This absence in the historical record transforms the ark from a physical object into a profound spiritual question. The silence surrounding its fate ensures that the narrative continues centuries after the fall of Jerusalem. The temple was gone, the vessels were scattered, and the people were exiled. Yet the ark, the supreme object of the covenant, was simply missing. The catastrophe of the Babylonian shadow sets the stage for a dramatic theological shift, prompting religious leaders to consider how the covenant could survive without its physical embodiment, leading directly to the prophecies of a future where the golden box would no longer be needed or missed. The physical disappearance of the Ark of the Covenant, a silence that echoed through the ruined temple and across the exiled lands of Babylon, forced a profound and necessary theological reckoning among the surviving Israelites. For centuries, the Ark had been the geographical and spiritual center of their relationship with God. Its physical presence was the guarantee of the covenant. Now that it was gone, looted, destroyed, or secretly hidden, how could the covenant endure? This question was addressed with striking clarity and prescience by the prophet Jeremiah, who spoke of a future where the golden box would not only be gone, but would also cease to be necessary. Jeremiah's prophecy concerning the ark is one of the most remarkable and forward-looking passages in the entire scriptural record. He speaks directly to the moment of absence, offering a calming meditation on the nature of faith versus reliance on physical objects. Speaking to the people who would return to the desolate land after the exile, Jeremiah prophesied a time of restoration. He said that in those future days, the people would no longer speak of the Ark of the Covenant, and it would not even come to mind. They would not remember it, nor would they miss it, nor would they make another one. This prediction made when the memory of the sacred chest was still fresh and painful, was astonishingly radical. The theological implication was immense. The ultimate guarantee of God's presence was shifting from a physical, external object, a gilded box holding stone tablets, to an internal, spiritual reality. Jeremiah prophesied a new covenant, distinct from the one represented by the ark. This new covenant would not be written on stone, but would be written by God directly upon the hearts and minds of the people. This intellectual and spiritual shift suggested that God's presence would be internalized and universal, making the need for a specific, localized physical conduit, such as the golden ark in the Holy of Holies, utterly obsolete. The faith would no longer be centered on a geographic location or a tangible relic, but on the personal, internal obedience and relationship of every individual. This prophetic perspective provided immense spiritual comfort during the long, agonizing years of the Babylonian exile. It taught the people that their relationship with God was not dependent on the survival of a material object, no matter how sacred. The destruction of the temple and the loss of the ark, therefore, were not the termination of the covenant, but rather the difficult, painful preparation for its next, higher form. The ark's disappearance marked the transition from a faith of temple ritual to a faith of heartfelt obedience. This theological interpretation helps explain why the generations that rebuilt Jerusalem and the Second Temple, which never contained the original ark, were able to continue their religious life without a crippling sense of loss. The ark was gone, but the law, the essence of the covenant, was now understood to be written within them. The prophecy of the ark's obsolescence is the final word from the official historical record. From this point forward, the search for the ark leaves the domain of history and enters the realm of pure, enduring legend, rumor, and speculation. The need for an answer, however, remained powerful, and the human imagination rushed to fill the historical void left by Nebuchadnezzar's silence. The most compelling and romanticized of these legends, a narrative of daring theft and an extraordinary journey across continents, became enshrined in the national identity of a foreign land, providing a compelling contrast to the quiet intellectualism of Jeremiah's prophecy. This contrast introduces the most persistent and cherished of all the ark's disappearance myths. With the ark having vanished from Jerusalem's official history, its trail was picked up not by historians, but by storytellers, theologians, and travelers of deep faith. The most famous, detailed, and passionately held non-biblical theory of the ark's fate is preserved in the sacred texts and national memory of Ethiopia. This claim is codified in the Kebra Nagasis, or the Glory of Kings, a 14th century document that traces the imperial lineage of Ethiopia back to the biblical King Solomon. This legend offers a romantic, comprehensive, and continuous narrative that contrasts sharply with the abrupt silence of the Hebrew texts. The Ethiopian legend begins during the reign of King Solomon, the very king who placed the ark into the temple. It states that the Queen of Sheba, who visited Solomon in Jerusalem, bore him a son upon her return home, naming him Menelik. When Menelik grew to manhood, he traveled from Ethiopia back to Jerusalem to meet his father. Solomon received his son with honor, desiring him to remain in Jerusalem, but Menelik ultimately insisted on returning to his mother's kingdom. Upon his departure, Solomon, to honor and comfort his son, arranged for the sons of his chief priests and nobles to accompany Menelik back to Ethiopia. But the story takes a dramatic turn through the piety and ambition of one of these young noblemen, Azariah, the son of the high priest Zadok. Filled with righteous indignation at what he perceived as Solomon's excessive focus on wealth and his recent indulgence in foreign wives and idolatry, Azariah determined that the true seat of God's presence should be moved to a land of purer faith. Azariah, along with a group of companions, managed a clandestine and daring feat. They entered the temple, removed the Ark of the Covenant from the Holy of Holies, and replaced it with a clever, exact replica. Under the cover of night, the true Ark was then spirited out of Jerusalem. The journey of Menelik and his companions across the desert, according to the Kebronegist, was miraculously swift, suggesting that the Ark itself and the divine presence it carried was guiding and speeding their travel. The narrative describes a journey marked by miracles and the constant presence of the Shekinah glory cloud. The Ark's arrival in Ethiopia was a moment of profound national transformation, establishing the Ethiopian royal house as the true inheritors of the divine covenant, replacing the faltering dynasty of Solomon. The legend asserts that the Ark, now in its new African home, was brought to the ancient city of Axum, the spiritual heart of Ethiopia. Today, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church maintains that the original Ark of the Covenant remains secured in a specially consecrated chapel on the grounds of the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum. This sanctuary, known as the Chapel of the Tablet, is intensely restricted. According to tradition, only one man, a specially consecrated monk known as the Guardian of the Ark, is allowed to enter the chapel and look upon the sacred chest. He is tasked with its perpetual, solitary care until his death, upon which a new guardian is chosen. The very presence of the Ark is believed to be the foundation of Ethiopia's unique national identity and its long, enduring history as a Christian kingdom. This segment relies entirely on cultural history and compelling legend, providing rich, descriptive detail on a distant land and a highly romanticized narrative of the Ark's relocation. The story of Menelik's theft and the Ark's subsequent residence in Axum stands as the most vibrant and enduring counter-narrative to the historical fact of its disappearance, offering a continuous, tangible, though unverified, link to the past, providing a powerful contrast to the intellectual, theological solutions offered by Jeremiah. Having journeyed across the deserts of the ancient world with the profound Ethiopian legend, we now pivot sharply, sailing back across the Mediterranean to the medieval castles and emerging financial centers of Europe, exploring one of the most enduring, complex, and romanticized theories of the Ark's fate. A tale of vast, hidden treasure, profound secrecy, and the enigmatic military order known simply as the Knights Templar. This controversial theory takes us back, once more, to the most sacred and contested ground on earth, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the very bedrock where the Ark once rested, and where, centuries later, the Templars established the headquarters that gave them their name and their legendary fortune. The Order of the Poor Fellow, Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, was founded in 1119 AD, shortly after the First Crusade secured Jerusalem for the Christian West. Their initial purpose, as declared, was humble and necessary: to protect the vulnerable European pilgrims traveling the dangerous roads to the holy sites. However, their physical location granted by King Baldwin II, was not arbitrary. It was the absolute key to the mystery. They were housed in a wing of the former Al-Aqsa Mosque, which they believed, rightly or wrongly, stood over the precise, sacred ground of the Holy of Holies of Solomon's destroyed temple. Their name, taken directly from this revered location, the Knights of the Temple, instantly imbued them with a profound spiritual authority. For the first 9 years of their existence, the order remained strikingly small, poor, and curiously inactive as a military force, a fact that puzzled many contemporary chroniclers of the Crusader kingdom. While the roads to Jaffa and the coast remained treacherous, the small band of knights, led by Hugues de Payan, seemed preoccupied. Their primary, indeed, their all-consuming activity during this period seems to have been not on the battlefield, but deep beneath the ruins of the Temple Mount itself. Many historians and theorists suggest that these early Templars, far from merely securing the pilgrim roads, were instead conducting a meticulous, secret, and organized excavation of the subterranean vaults, cisterns, and natural caves that honeycombed the platform. They were searching for something specific, something far more valuable and ancient than the mere gold or jewels of the Muslim and Byzantine eras, something that could elevate their small, humble order to the global, economic, and spiritual powerhouse it would swiftly become. The secrecy surrounding these initial 9 years is thick, deliberate, and built into the very foundations of the Templar legend. It is posited that they were seeking the spiritual and material treasures of the lost Temple of Solomon, treasures which Jewish priests and zealots had hidden during the catastrophic sieges, first by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and later by the Romans in 70 AD. And at the absolute pinnacle of this lost hoard, the prize that would grant them ultimate, unchallengeable authority and power, was the Ark of the Covenant itself. The prevailing theory suggests that the Templars either found the Ark or found other equally potent temple artifacts, perhaps the sacred 7-branched lampstand, the table of showbread, or vast caches of gold, which they then used as spiritual and economic leverage to gain the immense wealth and unprecedented papal favor that swiftly followed their years of digging in the dark. The transformation of the Templars after those 9 secretive years was astonishing and virtually inexplicable by conventional means. They emerged from the quiet depths of the Temple Mount as the most powerful and feared organization in the entire medieval world. They quickly evolved from a small military unit into the world's first multinational bank, operating a vast network of castles, commanderies, and financial houses across Europe, receiving unprecedented privileges and exemptions, answering only to the Pope. This meteoric, unearned rise from poverty to unimaginable wealth and influence fueled the persistent rumors that they had unearthed a secret of profound religious or military significance that fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Christian world. The theory holds that if the Templars did, in fact, find the Ark, they would have been compelled to move it repeatedly as the Crusader kingdoms inevitably collapsed. First, it would have been relocated, perhaps to their massive fortress in the coastal city of Acre, where they retained a strong presence. Later, and certainly, it would have been transported by ship back to Europe following the devastating fall of Jerusalem to Saladin and the subsequent loss of the last Crusader strongholds. The final destination of the Ark, according to this intricate narrative, is often speculated to be one of the Templar strongholds in France, perhaps a quiet, forgotten vault in a castle in the south, or even concealed somewhere along the hidden subterranean networks of their vast estates. The eventual, abrupt, and brutal downfall of the Knights Templar in 1307, orchestrated by King Philip IV of France, who coveted their wealth, and Pope Clement V, only deepens the mystery. The Templars were arrested on charges of heresy, torture, and a range of shocking offenses. However, when the king's agents swept across France on that fateful Friday the 13th, arresting thousands of knights and seizing their assets, they were sorely disappointed. The vast documented wealth, the sacred relics, and the legendary treasures they expected to seize were conspicuously not found. They had vanished. The Templars, skilled in logistics, finance, and secrecy, had successfully spirited away their most precious assets, creating a historical void that conspiracy theorists fill to this day with the golden gleam of the Ark of the Covenant, forever hidden in a dark European vault. This tale of medieval mystery and hidden tunnels allows for a calming focus on ancient stones and forgotten vaults, transitioning into other, equally compelling, non-traditional Ark theories that focus on oral traditions and long-lost cultures. After the tumultuous, secretive movements of the Knights Templar across continents, we turn again to the quiet but enduring landscape of Africa, exploring a parallel and equally fascinating claim to the Ark's spiritual power, a legacy found in the customs and oral history of a long-lost yet enduring culture. This is the story of the Lemba people, a community dwelling across the modern nations of South Africa and Zimbabwe, who have, for centuries, maintained an unwavering tradition of Jewish identity and a direct genealogical connection to the ancient temple in Jerusalem. Their claim to possess a sacred replica, or the very essence of the Ark's power, offers a calm, anthropological meditation on the strength of oral history, providing a deep, resonant echo to the foundational mystery of the Ark's disappearance. The Lemba are physically and superficially indistinguishable from their Bantu-speaking neighbors in southern Africa, sharing language and many cultural traits. However, their core religious and cultural practices are markedly different and deeply rooted in a distinctive Semitic heritage. Their stringent traditions prohibit them from consuming pork. They practice male circumcision and ritual purification. They observe ritual slaughtering practices closely mirroring kosher laws, and they adhere strictly to endogamy, refraining from intermarriage. All deeply held customs strongly aligning with ancient Jewish law. The most extraordinary part of their self-identity, however, is their pervasive oral tradition, which recounts a precise history of a migration from a place they call Senna, a legendary city that many scholars link to Yemen, a traditional Jewish trading hub, or perhaps even an ancient, veiled reference to Judea itself, led by a specific priestly clan centuries ago. Their narratives speak of a sacred object they carried with them, known as the Ngoma Lungundu, which translates most evocatively to the drum that thunders. The description of the Ngoma Lungundu, as meticulously preserved in the Lemba's oral history across generations, strikingly parallels the physical and functional aspects of the Ark of the Covenant. It was said to be a holy object made of wood and carried on poles by their priests that only certain consecrated individuals could touch. It was believed to possess immense and terrifying power, capable of felling enemies, bringing down fortifications, and striking people dead if they profaned it through unauthorized contact. The Lemba recount that this sacred object was eventually hidden or destroyed after a devastating battle, perhaps symbolizing the destruction of their own capital. But its memory and spiritual power remain absolutely central to their identity and religious life. In recent decades, this compelling oral history has transitioned from the realm of pure myth into the light of scientific evidence. Genetic testing conducted on the Lemba's male population revealed the presence of a specific Y chromosome marker known as the Cohen modal haplotype, or CMH. This genetic marker is statistically far more prevalent among the Kohanim, the descendants of Aaron, the priestly class of traditional Jewish communities worldwide. The presence of this CMH marker within the Lemba, and particularly concentrated within their own priestly clan, the Buba, provides a remarkable, scientifically verifiable echo for their persistent cultural claim that they are the direct descendants of the Jewish priests who left Judea centuries ago. This genetic connection strongly suggests that at least a significant portion of the Lemba lineage originated from the ancient Levant, lending profound credence to the idea that their ancestors were indeed responsible for carrying sacred traditions, perhaps even a sacred object or replica, far away from Jerusalem to save it from the rising empires. The historical timeline for the Lemba's migration, though complex and spanning centuries, generally aligns with the period immediately following the destruction of the First Temple, reinforcing the possibility that the organized flight of a priestly faction carrying temple-related treasures could have occurred either during the siege or immediately after the devastating Babylonian destruction. While the original Ngoma Lungundu may now be lost, or was perhaps a high-quality, spiritually charged replica of the Ark made by the priests, the spiritual lineage remains a profound, living testament to the possibility of the Ark's survival and the dispersal of its legacy outside of the Holy Land. This quiet, anthropological meditation on the Lemba people and their enduring rituals offers a different kind of possibility than the grand, explosive, and centralized theories of the Templars or the Kings. It suggests that the Ark's protection was not a solitary, single act of hiding beneath the temple, but rather an organized, deliberate dispersal by multiple, loyal, priestly factions, each carrying a piece of the covenant's material or spiritual legacy far from the destruction. This persistent, unbroken line of oral history offers a soothing contrast to the silence of the historical record, leading us naturally to a discussion of other, more literal, hidden treasure maps that detail where other precious objects from the temple might have been hidden, perhaps providing the context for the Lemba's own long journey. From the living, breathing oral traditions of the Lemba people in southern Africa, we turn our attention back once more to the silent, arid, wind-swept deserts surrounding the Dead Sea, to a location whose name is now synonymous with ancient Jewish secrecy and survival, the remote settlement of Qumran. This isolated cluster of ruins, nestled near the desolate caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, provides a powerful and tangible link to the desperate final attempts by the priesthood to safeguard the sacred treasures of the temple. The accidental discovery of the highly unusual copper scroll in one of these remote caverns offers the most literal and tantalizing treasure map in all of ancient history, prompting endless speculation about the fate of the Ark itself. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered serendipitously starting in 1947, represent a massive collection of religious and secular texts hidden in the caves by a highly disciplined ascetic sect, likely the Essenes, who lived at Qumran in the centuries immediately preceding the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. But among the thousands of brittle, leather, and papyrus fragments, one object stood out for its unique material and its startling content: the Copper Scroll. This document was not written on perishable animal skin or pressed reeds. It was inscribed on thin sheets of pure copper, meticulously hammered and etched with text, and then carefully rolled up tightly. This choice of material signifies that the content was meant to endure, surviving fire, water, and the immense passage of time. It was not a religious treatise, but a document of permanent, practical, and highly sensitive importance. The translated text of the Copper Scroll is unlike any other artifact found at Qumran or in the wider historical record. It is a precise inventory and a detailed map, listing 64 separate caches of gold, silver, and other precious vessels, providing precise yet cryptically worded locations across the Judean landscape. The sheer quantity of wealth described is staggering, estimated by some scholars to be equivalent to hundreds of tons of precious metal, constituting the majority of the temple's immense treasury. The language used in the scroll is not the religious poetry or sectarian rules of the Essenes, but rather the formal, administrative language of the official temple treasury, suggesting that the scroll was compiled by the temple priests themselves in a final, frantic, and highly organized effort to save their assets before the inevitable Roman siege of 70 AD. The central, enduring mystery posed by this unparalleled treasure map is whether one of its 64 locations points, however cryptically, to the hiding place of the Ark of the Covenant, while the scroll meticulously names large amounts of gold and silver vessels. It never explicitly names the Ark. However, the sheer desperation and the massive scale of the hiding operation, undertaken right before the temple's ultimate destruction, make it profoundly plausible that the most sacred object of all would have been secured first, and possibly recorded in a more cryptic or even entirely separate manner to protect its identity and location from being compromised. The scroll's pervasive focus on the surrounding landscape, the details of cisterns, conduits, tombs, and aqueducts, creates a powerful sense of peaceful isolation, allowing us to mentally wander the arid terrain, looking for the quiet, dusty, precisely described hiding places. The detailed description of the Qumran caves and the arid, unyielding desert environment creates a profound sense of protective isolation. The Essenes themselves, who valued purity and ritual separation, may have provided the logistical support or the secure location for hiding the treasures. The caves, some so remote and difficult to access they are virtually natural vaults, were the perfect natural repositories for objects meant to survive untouched for centuries. The content of the scroll indicates that the priests, in their final moments of freedom, did not simply flee, but rather engaged in a massive, organized effort to ensure that the treasures of the covenant survived the destruction. This search for literal, hidden treasure, guided by the enduring copper map, transitions our discussion to other, non-literal, yet equally powerful hiding places mentioned in apocryphal and non-canonical texts. The Copper Scroll gives us the map for the physical, monetary valuables. The apocryphal texts, in contrast, provide the spiritual roadmap for the most sacred object itself, leading us from the deep, secret desert hideouts to the lonely, symbolic height of Mount Nebo. The silence of the scroll concerning the ark speaks volumes, suggesting a secret too great, too sacred, and too dangerous even for a map etched in copper. If the enigmatic copper scroll provides a tangible, if frustratingly cryptic map to the temple's material gold and silver, then the non-canonical book of Sec Maccabees provides the spiritual and geographic map to the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant itself, guiding us to a specific, highly legendary hiding place. This narrative, while not accepted as canonical scripture by all faith traditions, offers a compelling, profound, and beautifully concise answer to the question of the Ark's vanishing point, grounding the mystery on the solitary, wind-swept height of Mount Nebo. This segment is a calm meditation on geography, prophecy, and enduring legend, set against the backdrop of a mountain steeped in the deepest history of Israelite transition and covenant. The narrative preserved in 2nd Maccabees, written centuries after the tragic events it describes, focuses specifically on the chaotic period immediately preceding the catastrophic Babylonian invasion of 586 BCE. It states that the prophet Jeremiah, one of the most prominent and sorrowful figures in the final days of the kingdom of Judah, recognized the inevitability of the impending destruction and acted decisively under direct divine instruction. He is described as taking the Ark of the Covenant and the sacred altar of incense from the temple in Jerusalem. His sacred mission was to ensure that these two most holy objects did not fall into the hands of the profane, invading Babylonian army, nor be destroyed in the temple's coming conflagration. He transported them out of the city, across the Jordan River, and into the remote wilderness east of the Promised Land. The passage then describes Jeremiah finding a specific cave on Mount Nebo, the same sacred historical mountain where Moses, the original deliverer and lawgiver, had stood centuries earlier to view the Promised Land before his own death, forbidden from entering it himself. This choice of location is profoundly symbolic and deeply intentional. The very place where the original covenant leader ended his physical journey becomes the designated final resting place for the most central physical artifact of that covenant. Jeremiah placed the ark and the sacred vessels in a concealed, deep cave on the mountain and then sealed the entrance, marking the spot with both secrecy and divine finality. The text goes on to describe the prophet's final, stern warnings. When some of his followers, who had aided in the hiding, tried to mark the way or find the specific location of the cave for future retrieval, Jeremiah rebuked them fiercely. He declared that the place would remain perpetually unknown and concealed until God gathered the people together again and received them unto mercy. At that time, the glory of the Lord would once more appear, just as it did in the days of Moses and Solomon, and the cloud of the Shekinah would settle over the spot, signaling the ark's miraculous return. This prophetic finality transforms the act of hiding the ark into an eschatological event, a promise that the ark would return not when man found it through archaeological digging, but when the time of divine restoration and ultimate favor had arrived, removing the search from human hands. The significance of Mount Nebo as the ark's resting place offers a powerful, emotional, and spiritual closure to the initial volatile chapter of the ark's history. It is the geographic and historical bookend to the covenant's long, volatile journey. The same mountain that witnessed the end of the desert wandering and the transition into the promised land is the place where the covenant's most sacred physical symbol was withdrawn from the world, awaiting a future, purer re-entry. The imagery of a lone, silent cave high on a mountain, sealed by a great prophet against the coming darkness, is one of quiet, eternal vigil, a place of silent, unmoving watchfulness that resists the noise and chaos of historical collapse. This story of physical hiding, located in a specific, geologically plausible, and profoundly symbolic site, transitions our narrative from pure legend to the reality of the physical search. If the ark was indeed hidden in such an organized manner by a prophet, then perhaps the tunnels, vaults, and subterranean structures immediately surrounding the temple in Jerusalem, where the final removal would have had to take place, hold the remaining silent clues. We move from the lone, quiet cave of prophecy back to the intensely active and contested network of tunnels beneath the Temple Mount itself, the site of the ark's last confirmed location. Having explored the varied and dramatic legendary hiding places, from the sacred, prophetic caves of Mount Nebo to the remote, coded sites described by the Copper Scroll and the enduring spiritual sanctuaries of Africa, we now return for a final, profound meditation to the ultimate ground zero of the mystery, the ancient, contested platform of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This highly sacred platform, the most religiously significant piece of real estate on earth, is underlain by a massive, complex, and still largely unexplored network of tunnels, cisterns, and ancient vaults, a subterranean world that many believe still holds the ultimate, physical key to the ark's fate. This final, tranquil chapter focuses on the quiet, dusty work of exploration and the massive, unseen scale of the ancient substructure, setting up a closing reflection on the ark's enduring, silent power. The Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, is not a solid mass of natural rock, but an immense, engineered structure built upon centuries of successive foundations and reconstructions. Beneath the visible platform, the original ancient bedrock is honeycombed with vast, deep, rock-cut cisterns used for collecting and storing rainwater, secret passages used by the temple priests for ritual access, and immense stone vaults that predate even the Second Temple. The foundation of the First Temple, which housed the Ark in its Holy of Holies, is thought to extend down deep into these unseen depths, built directly over the central sacred bedrock known as the Foundation Stone. If the Ark was not taken out of the city during the siege, as the Jeremiah and Ethiopian legends suggest, then it was almost certainly hidden deep within this network of tunnels. The belief that the Ark is hidden directly beneath the Temple Mount platform is the most grounded theory in terms of practical historical context for the Babylonian siege of 586 BCE. The priests would have only had hours or days, not weeks, to secure the Ark. The most immediate, easiest, quickest, and safest hiding place would have been a massive vault or cistern chamber directly beneath the Holy of Holies, a secure spot known only to the high priest and a few trusted Levites. Indeed, Tradition holds that King Solomon himself, in his great wisdom, prepared these subterranean vaults precisely for the purpose of securing the ark in case of national crisis or foreign invasion, ensuring that the centerpiece of the covenant could survive any surface destruction. The ongoing archaeological exploration in this intensely charged region is complex, dangerous, and fraught with immense political and religious sensitivities. Various search groups, particularly those associated with the Temple Research Institutes in Israel, have meticulously mapped and explored sections of the network, most famously the Western Wall tunnels, which run alongside the entire length of the foundation of the Temple Mount. These tunnels allow the visitor to walk along the original street level of ancient Jerusalem, revealing immense Herodian stones and ancient sealed doorways that hint at deeper, inaccessible chambers. The sheer scale of the ancient substructure is astonishing. Walking through these cool, quiet tunnels, one encounters immense, silent, carved stone chambers and great, sealed, rock-hewn doorways that lead only to darkness. Each of these sealed, forgotten chambers represents a theoretical, tantalizing possibility for the ark's resting place. The work is slow and painstaking, often relying on small remote cameras, ground-penetrating radar technology, and historical intuition to explore areas that are too sensitive, too collapsed, or too dangerous for human entry. The air in these depths is still, dusty, and overwhelmingly ancient. The entire narrative of the search beneath the Temple Mount is a powerful reflection of the ark's enduring cultural and spiritual significance. The physical object is gone, but its presence is so profound that it continues to shape geography, archaeology, and international politics centuries later. The quiet, dusty work of exploration in the perpetual darkness below, where the air is cool and the weight of history is immense, provides a calming final scene. It is a quest that may never conclude, but the searching itself, the patient, dedicated effort to uncover the truth, is a continuing testament to the profound, unapproachable power of the golden chest, the sacred object that still hides its secrets in the deep silence beneath the holy city, waiting for the time of its return. Having concluded our physical search in the dusty, silent tunnels beneath Jerusalem, we now pivot entirely, moving away from location-based theories to explore the very essence of the ark, its danger. This is a theological and philosophical chapter that steps away from the question of where the ark is to confront the terrifying question of why it was so profoundly dangerous. For an object meant to symbolize God's presence and mercy, the Ark of the Covenant was the deadliest artifact in the entire ancient world, a conduit of power too immense for ordinary human contact. It was not merely protected by rules, it actively enforced them with lethal precision. The most illustrative and terrifying story detailing this innate danger is the account of Uzzah. After the Philistines returned the ark, having suffered plagues and destruction during its unwelcome stay, it was housed for many years in the house of Abinadab. Later, during King David's glorious procession to bring the ark to Jerusalem, it was placed on a new cart, perhaps an attempt to imitate the Philistines, who did not understand the strict rules of transport. When the oxen stumbled, the cart jolted, and Uzzah, one of the men driving the cart, instinctively reached out and touched the ark to steady it, a simple, reflexive action. The immediate result was catastrophic. He was struck dead instantly by divine wrath. This was not a moment of malicious intent, but an act of simple preservation. Yet the outcome was absolute. The ark's power demanded total separation. This event underscores a terrifying principle. Proximity to the sacred is not safety, it is the ultimate risk. The incident of Uzzah and the subsequent terror it instilled in King David, who refused to move the ark for months afterward, underscores the core theological concept at play: the boundary between the mortal and the divine, often called the line between the sacred and the profane. The ark was the earthly footstool for the invisible presence known as kavod, YHWH, or the glory, weight, God. This glory was not a gentle, ethereal light. It was conceived as a crushing, consuming force, akin to a spiritual nuclear reactor. To cross the established boundary was to invite the instant annihilation that comes from encountering pure, unmediated power. This necessity for separation dictated the entire architectural design of the temple and the ritual life of the priests. The ark was housed within the Holy of Holies, the innermost, darkest, and most sacred chamber. This chamber was separated from the rest of the temple by an immense, thick, and richly embroidered veil, a physical and spiritual barrier that was crossed only once a year. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest would enter this chamber, but only after extensive purification rituals, carrying smoking incense to cloud the mercy seat, deliberately creating a buffer between himself and the divine presence. Even then, it was said he wore a rope tied to his ankle, so his body could be retrieved if he died inside, a macabre yet pragmatic acknowledgement of the constant mortal danger inherent in the place. The profound fear of looking was paramount. If touching brought instantaneous death, merely gazing upon the unveiled ark was equally fatal. After the ark was returned from the Philistine captivity, some men of Beth Shemesh, curious about the object that had plagued their enemies, dared to peer inside the chest. The historical account records that 70 men were struck down for this sacrilege. It was the transgression of sight, the breaking of the covenant's visual taboo. The ark was not meant to be a spectacle. It was meant to be carried, obeyed, and respected from a safe distance, always cloaked in its prescribed coverings when in transit. This relentless enforcement of the boundary transformed the ark from a mere religious relic into a dynamic weapon of separation. It taught the people that the distance between man and God was real, absolute, and guarded by terror. The very existence of the ark was a constant, shimmering reminder of human fallibility, sin, and mortality. No matter how righteous the priest or how great the king, the moment they forgot the rules, the ark delivered swift, terrible judgment. Its power was unconstrained by human emotion or intention. It did not judge the heart of Uzzah, only the action of the hand. This contemplation of the ark's pure, overwhelming power, a power that resisted all attempts at familiarity, leads us naturally to the question of its replacement. When an object this sacred and dangerous vanishes, what fills the immense, terrifying void it leaves behind? Having confronted the raw, unapproachable power of the physical ark, a power that demanded distance and claimed lives, we now turn to the profound spiritual void left by its disappearance. When an object that served as the central conduit between the divine and the mortal world vanishes, how does a faith tradition adapt? This chapter explores the peaceful and profound ways in which Jewish tradition adapted to the ark's absence, shifting from a faith centered on a physical, terrifying object to one centered on an accessible, written concept. The primary physical replacement for the Ark of the Covenant in Jewish life today is the Aron Kodesh, or the Holy Ark, found in every synagogue worldwide. This is not a container for the original Ark, but a ceremonial cabinet or niche built into the wall of the synagogue, always oriented toward Jerusalem. The Aron Kodesh conceptually replaces the ancient Holy of Holies and is now the most sacred focal point of worship. Its role is simple. It is the revered home for the Torah scrolls, the handwritten parchment containing the 5 books of Moses. This transition from the Ark to the Torah scrolls is the single most significant spiritual shift following the Ark's disappearance. The golden chest contained the stone tablets of the law. The wooden cabinet now contains the expansive, written account of that law. The faith moved from the power inherent in the physical, miraculous object to the power resident in the accessible, interpreted word. The focus shifted from the terrifying presence of God to the enduring, teachable wisdom of God. The reverence shown to the Torah scrolls today mirrors the awe once reserved for the Ark. The scrolls are dressed in velvet and silver ornamentation. They are never touched directly by human hand. A pointer called a yad is used, and they are carried through the congregation in a procession, recalling the journeys of the Ark through the wilderness. When the Aron Kodesh is opened, the congregation rises and the atmosphere in the room changes, acknowledging that the spiritual presence of the covenant has been revealed in its written form. The transition emphasizes that while the divine presence may no longer be localized in a single golden box, it is universally available within the text of the revealed word. To visit Jerusalem today is to encounter the physical manifestation of this absence. While the Temple Mount platform itself is inaccessible to deep archaeological exploration, the adjacent Western Wall tunnels offer a unique perspective. As one walks through the underground passages, the path eventually leads to a specific, small alcove situated directly opposite where the Holy of Holies, and thus the Ark, once rested. This alcove, often marked by a faint light and filled with quiet, continuous prayer, represents the empty space. It is a potent reminder of the void the Ark left behind, but it is a void that has been filled not by despair, but by prayer and textual study. This is a quiet, meditative chapter about enduring faith, ritual continuity, and the transition from a physical artifact to a spiritual concept. The Ark's story serves as a profound lesson in non-attachment. The people were forced to accept that the very focus of their power and identity could vanish, and that faith must survive and flourish without the assurance of a golden, tangible presence. The covenant survived the loss of its container. This replacement, the Aron Kodesh and the Torah, provides a sense of spiritual completion that contrasts sharply with the Ark's chaotic, often sensationalized portrayal in modern popular culture. It is to that modern, fictional life, a world of melting faces and dramatic curses, that we now turn our attention, offering a gentle transition from the solemnity of history to the playful terror of the cinema. Having explored the ark's true, terrifying nature and its quiet spiritual replacement in the modern faith, we take a final, light-hearted step into the world of fiction, where the golden chest was explosively resurrected for a new global audience. This chapter provides a necessary, modern contrast by examining the ark's dramatic appearance in movies and popular literature, focusing almost entirely on the 1981 film, Raiders of the Lost Ark. This cinematic masterpiece didn't just tell a story, it cemented the ark in the global public imagination, defining its look, its dramatic journey, and its exaggerated cinematic curse effects for generations who may never read the books of Exodus or Samuel. Before Raiders, the Ark of the Covenant was largely confined to religious study, historical texts, and niche archaeological theories. After Raiders, it became a household name, synonymous with exotic adventure, ancient curses, and untold destructive power. The film's version of the Ark is a beautiful synthesis of the biblical description, combining the golden box, the permanent carrying poles, and the crowning cherubim, making it instantly recognizable and profoundly iconic. The filmmakers, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, understood the visual power of the biblical blueprint and translated that unearthly majesty directly to the screen. The central dramatic flourish of the film, and what makes its portrayal so distinct from history, is the mechanism of its curse. In the movie, when the Ark is opened by the Nazi antagonists, it unleashes a supernatural force that melts faces, ignites bodies, and sends ethereal spirits soaring. A moment of gruesome, spectacular special effects that is now inseparable from the Ark's legend in popular culture. This fictional climax defined the Ark as a weapon of spectacular visual vengeance. We must compare this highly theatrical, cinematic curse to the historical and biblical version. The real-world dangers associated with the Ark were not about melting faces in a dramatic, slow-burn reveal. The biblical curses were subtle, systemic, and terrifyingly efficient. They involved the instant, silent death by touch, as seen with Uzzah, or widespread plague, tumors, and internal sickness, as seen when the Philistines housed the Ark. When the Philistine idol Dagon fell before the Ark, the destruction was symbolic and localized. The biblical Ark was not a special effect. It was a devastating force of ritual enforcement, demanding purity and adherence to specific law, punishing transgression with lethal finality rather than theatrical horror. The light style and focus on cinema here provide a gentle, non-threatening ending to the historical and theological section of our journey. The film, in its own way, inadvertently reinforced the core message of the Ark, that it is an object too immense for human control or profanity. Indiana Jones, the great archaeologist, survives only because he understands the fundamental rule that Uzzah violated: do not look. He and Marion survive by closing their eyes, acknowledging the superiority of the divine over human curiosity or military might. This journey ensures that the Ark's mystery will never truly fade. It has embedded the ancient object into the permanent collective unconscious of the modern world. Every new discovery in Jerusalem, every claim from Ethiopia, every academic thesis is now filtered through the lens of a blockbuster film, giving the centuries-old artifact a modern, dynamic, and perpetually exciting life. This cultural immortality sets the stage for our final reflection, allowing us to ask where the true, enduring power of this golden chest ultimately resides. We come now to the final chapter of our long, contemplative journey, having traced the golden arc of the Ark of the Covenant from the smoking heights of Mount Sinai to the silent, rock-cut chambers beneath Jerusalem. This final reflection is not about solving the mystery, for that is a conclusion that history has reserved for a time far beyond our own, but rather about embracing the profound and powerful meaning of its absence. The true, enduring legacy of the Ark is defined not by where it currently rests, but by the undeniable fact that it is missing. This void, this historical silence, is perhaps the most eloquent part of its story. Let us briefly summarize the Ark's extraordinary historical journey, the narrative that provides the bedrock for every theory we have explored. It began with the impossible blueprint received by Moses on Sinai, crafted from humble acacia wood and pure gold. Its power contained yet ready to strike. It traveled with the Israelites through 4 decades of wandering, leading armies, clearing paths, and serving as the volatile, tangible epicenter of the new covenant. It was housed for centuries at the sanctuary of Shiloh, a time marked by its capture by the Philistines and its terrifying return, forcing men to acknowledge its unyielding sacredness. Finally, it achieved its zenith, finding its permanent intended home in the Holy of Holies of the glorious temple built by King Solomon in Jerusalem, resting at the absolute spiritual center of the Jewish world. And then, at some point, before or during the catastrophic Babylonian siege of 586 BCE, the golden chest vanished, leaving behind only silence, rumor, and an immense, palpable spiritual vacuum that has stretched across 2.5 millennia. We have followed the great geographical and philosophical paths attempting to fill that silence. We traveled the long, dusty road to Axum, Ethiopia, where a small, ancient church maintains the boldest claim of possession, protected by a perpetual, silent vow. We examined the dark, enduring tunnels and substructures of the Temple Mount, contemplating the desperate, last-minute hiding orchestrated by the priests beneath the Holy of Holies itself. We climbed the solitary, symbolic height of Mount Nebo, where the prophet Jeremiah is said to have hidden the ark in a cave, sealing the spot until the time of divine redemption. And we followed the Crusaders, pondering the great medieval mystery of the Knights Templar, whose sudden, massive wealth and immense secrets were perhaps derived from unearthing one of the temple's hidden treasures. The power of an object defined by its absence is a profound theological concept. The ark's vanishing forced an evolution in the very practice of the faith. It required Judaism to shift its central focus from a physical talisman, a terrifying, tangible object of divine presence that could kill you if you touched it, to a portable, internal, and scriptural covenant, the written law, embodied by the Torah. The ark became, in its absence, a symbol not of a physical, localized power, but of an eternal, unshakable promise that transcends geography. Its disappearance ensured that faith could travel, that the covenant was not physically trapped in a golden box, but embedded universally in the heart, the scroll, and the practice of life. The historical silence the ark left behind represents a maturation. The people were forced to move past the need for a visible, miraculous guarantor. The violent, instantaneous power of the presence, as seen in the death of Uzzah, was replaced by the quieter, enduring strength of the inherited law. The missing ark became a symbol of the immanence of God, a power that is everywhere and requires no single physical dwelling to be real. This profound pivot allowed the faith to survive the destruction of its physical home, the temple, by proving that the covenant resided in the community, not the architecture. The legacy of the ark resides ultimately in the compelling weight of the questions it inspires and the intense faith its mystery demands. Its ongoing absence ensures that the narratives of the ancient world remain dynamically alive, forcing us to continually confront the boundary between documented history and spiritual legend. The ark is the ultimate ghost in the great machine of history. It demands that we remember the age of miracles while forcing us to live by the strength of inner conviction. Its story concludes by reminding us that some of the greatest truths are not found in the clarity of discovery, but in the humility of not knowing, in the quiet awe inspired by the certainty that something immensely powerful was once here, and that its echo still shapes the world. The journey ends not with a clamorous answer, but with a peaceful, reflective quiet, allowing the listener to drift off while contemplating the most enduring and beautiful mystery of the ancient world, the hidden, unapproachable power of the golden chest.